Welcome to China Tech Talk, the weekly discussion of technology and startups here in China. I am John Artman, editor-in-chief of Technode.com, as always joined by Matthew Brennan, founder of China Channel. So, episode 50. Matt, we've come a long way. I think that when we look back at kind of how this all got started, it's amazing to think that we're about a year on, and just to, think that how fast that year has gone and how much you and I have actually done.
Yeah, 50 episodes. Woohoo! We should celebrate. We should, I don't know. Well, we are celebrating. Hooray!
Hooray!
Well, it's been a nice journey so far. I don't know about you, John, but so far I've enjoyed it, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that, it's just kind of funny because when you start doing something, you just kind of start doing it, and you do it the best that you can, and you kind of figure things out as you go. And as you move along, the way you do it ends up evolving and changing. And I think that, you and I, when we first started this, we basically didn't know each other. And now I think that we not only do we know each other pretty well, but we've also got a pretty good kind of working rhythm going on. And both of us were kind of in the groove of how to go about producing episodes, how to find guests and things like that. And I think, at the end of the day, I just feel so lucky to be able to do something like this. Not only to be able to talk to the people that we've talked with, which is amazing, but then also, to be able to provide this type of educational, informative, and I think well covered content about things in China that if you're a hardcore China watcher or a hardcore tech watcher, you're probably going to be fairly familiar with a lot of the things that we do talk about on this podcast. But at the same time, we're able to bring on experts who can talk about it in a way that I think is really difficult to find anywhere else.
Yeah. 50 episodes. I mean, we had a lull at one point, a couple of weeks. That I think we've been pretty consistent though. I think overall, there's not too many weeks where we missed out. So it's probably a little bit over a year actually since we begun. I'm actually trying to search back right now on the website to find out. And for those of you who don't know, we do have a website, ChinaTechTalk.com, where you can check out all the episodes. And I think this episode, we wanted to just stop for a second and sit back and reflect on all the content we've built up, all the great episodes and interviews and discussions we've had, and also give an opportunity to say thank you for the listeners. We really appreciate each and every one of you listening in, and we do occasionally get reviews, I believe. John, I use Android, so I don't have the iTunes store on my phone, but you do, John. Do you want to read
so for example, on iTunes, Herod84 says, it's really difficult to get good content in English, and this podcast delivers well on that front. Please keep up the good work. And British Lei Feng says, one of the best podcasts covering the internet technology companies and latest updates as they emerge. And also, I think a bit more recently as well, we've gotten some really good feedback on the Luckin Coffee episode. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But Tadas Planus, I don't know how to say that. I'm probably saying it wrong. Tadas Planus on iTunes says, lots of things are happening in China. Tech is going nuts, and no one really talks in depth about it. The China Tech Talk podcast changes that. Even though I live in Shanghai myself and work in tech, it's still very interesting to hear the insights. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons that we do the podcast as well, because Matt and I, we live in China, but we want to hear from the experts. And obviously we do some episodes where it's just Matt and I discussing a certain topic. But at the end of the day, I mean, most of our episodes are interviews, and they're interviews with experts in the field. And I think that there's just so much gold to dig up from people like that about what they do and kind of what they're seeing in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, I think there was a point, John, where we sat down and said, okay, we do actually want to keep some episodes with just us and mix it up and keep, not just so it's all interviews, all interviews. For us, that gives a little, I think it does a couple of things. It puts us under less pressure to find guests every week who are top quality. We can space it out a bit more. So that's good for that. But also, sometimes I think there's, the Lucky and Coffee is a good episode, a good example of that, where, I think we're also pretty well placed to discuss things that we're seeing on the ground that are emerging and would be pretty difficult to get a guest on for, actually. I don't think Starbucks would want to talk about it. I don't think Luckin's too small and too busy probably to find someone in to talk about it in English. So we're probably as well placed as anyone to discuss these trends. And so we hope to continue that forward. And if any of our listeners have suggestions on topics that they would like us to cover, or insights into or suggestions on how we're doing things, and please, we're welcome. You guys can catch me on Twitter or email. And that stuff's all in the show notes.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all in the show notes there. Both of our Twitter handles. So we've already mentioned a little bit about Luck and Coffee. But also, I mean, it's always fun, I think, to kind of look back and kind of really see how far you've come with any endeavor, just to also see how things have changed as well. And so one of the first interviews that we did was with Florian Bonert, who was then the head of international expansion for Mobike. He's still at Mobike, but more doing international partnerships, and so the nature of the job is slightly different. I mean, I think that, it really is still one of my favorite episodes, in part, of course, because it was one of the first interviews, but also because Florian's a great guest. And I think that he was really able to lay out the unique value that Mobike is bringing to the transportation industry, but then also really highlight some of the key trends at that time that was going on specifically with bike sharing.
Yeah, that was definitely our first big episode. Was that one with Florian about Mobike? Back at that time, it was peak bike sharing, peak bike rental. Definitely those people on the ground. Everyone was just talking about it so much. I mean, it was really such a new phenomenon, so visible, changing the streets of China, and everyone, even people who normally wouldn't care about a technology sector that much, were really, really interested in what was going on. So perhaps we have a snippet of that episode, John. We'll play that now, and listeners can. And if you like it, you can go back and listen to it. It's episode 4.
Yeah, and we'll include links to all previous episodes in the show notes as well for quick, easy reference. So Florian, I just want to kind of get back to kind of the early days a little bit, and one of the things that I'm curious about, and so you mentioned that you didn't realize at the time that it would necessarily grow as quickly as it has, but was that growth, was that scale part of the early vision, the early strategy? I mean, was it always kind of part of the plan to just scale as big as possible?
Yeah, definitely. I can say 2 things. The first thing is like the personalities and the experience of the founders, and the second thing is the fact that the solution is pretty culture agnostic. And so I can go into a little bit more detail for each. The first one is that we have 3 main co-founders. The founder and president is Hu Weiwei, and she's got about 12 to 15 years experience in mostly media circles in Beijing, and also focused on car industry. The CEO is Davis Wang, and he's got about 15-20 years experience in very large companies like Google and others. And he was also Shanghai GM for Uber, and the CTO, the person who brought me on board, worked in connected cars and services in Ford and Chrysler for also about 15 to 20 years. And in the early days, when we were in the old office, when we were just sitting a few desks away from each other, I remember very clearly that they already had this vision. They knew exactly the track that they were on, and the way they were managing us and the way they're still managing us and the way that the company worked is very, very much focused on growth, getting new users, more bikes, more rides. And a year ago, it was very, very clear to them the path that we were onto. I think they all have, they're really visionaries. I really admire them because I think they have the perfect combined experience, and they have a very, very clear vision of where we're going. And so all along, I'm very sure that they know exactly what they're doing, and they know exactly where they are. And the second one is the fact that the solution is pretty culture agnostic. So it works nicely in Shanghai or Beijing, two very different cities. Yes, one same country, but it also works very nicely in Singapore, where we launched about 2 months ago now. And we see a lot of different nationalities using the bikes. So we have over 150 different nationalities using the bikes in China and Singapore. And we have a lot of interest from other countries. So just inbound requests that come to us. And those requests come from all over the globe. So again, the fact that the solution is very culturally agnostic was also another indicator that the path would go like this, that we would scale so much and so fast and so big, and that we would have the chance to go to a lot of countries outside of China as well.
And so you mentioned a little bit about the co-founders and about kind of some how they've kind of had this vision all along. But I mean, what about like the values of the company? I mean, like what would you say? What like culturally, kind of what is tying the company together right now?
That's a real good question, and again, to highlight how much not control, but how much vision they have. Mobike, every single letter stands for a value, and so I can briefly run you through it. The M being move fast, and I think we don't need to explain a lot about that, but we've seen it in just a year. We've achieved almost 4 million bikes, over 700 million trips. The O is open-minded, so what I mentioned just now also mirrors nicely this open-minded attitude, whether it's internally or externally. The B is be bold. Again, I think that's pretty self-explanatory because the solution is really, really amazing, and it's a bold move. The I is innovation. Again, pretty self-explanatory. The K is knowledge-based leadership. So that's an insight that might answer your question a little bit more precisely. That's very much the way leadership operates within the company. And E is execution. And as any entrepreneur knows, a good idea is great, but without execution or anything without execution, it equals to nothing. So execution is also very, very important in our company culture.
And then I think so after Florian, so we're kind of going in chronological order. So after Florian, a few episodes later, we had Elijah Whaley on. And I think that, Matt, you've known Elijah for quite some time. I met him actually around the time because he was based in Beijing at the time, and actually I met him like the day after we recorded that episode.
Yeah, Elijah's great. So we've had him on twice on the podcast, but talking very specialist topic, I guess. When we look at things broadly, KOL influencers, online. Live stream and platforms in China that like Weibo, and yeah, he's got a very insider, deep perspective. Doing the actual work, also helping brands do the work. He's pretty much got a unique thing going on where he can see it from almost all sides. So yeah, there's a reason why we had him on twice.
Exactly.
There's not too many guests who we've had on twice.
And as you say, working with key opinion leaders, influencers, and things like that, it is a bit specialized. But I mean, I think that especially in this episode in particular, episode 10 that we had him on, he lays out really clearly why this form of marketing is the future of marketing. And I think that we're already starting to see it. I mean, like having having, you know, endorsements and having celebrities, you know, come on a commercial and say something, that's fairly common. But creating personal relationships with spokespeople, creating personal relationships literally with brands, that really is the future. And I think this is what I love about doing this podcast, is talking with people like Elijah, who are at the forefront of their industry, at the bleeding edge. They're exploring it, they're expanding it, and they're able to come back and kind of tell us what they found.
The idea that the influencers have the attention. They're the ones that people are going to for information and resources on what they should buy and what they should be, you know, what's hot and what's not. And some of these influencers are smart enough and are using that to create their own brands. And right now on Taobao, of the top 50 stores on Taobao, 23 of them are actually run by KOLs. And KOLs are actually building multi-million dollar businesses that are really, they are going to compete with major brands and labels. And the brands have to figure this out. If they don't do this, what I kind of put it in the very, you know, strong statement of, if you don't work with a KOL, you're going to be replaced by one. And the reason why is because they have the attention. There is, in China, there's not the advertising tools and the closed ecosystems of WeChat and the user behaviors don't allow advertising to work very well here, traditional advertising. And because brands are, I think some of it has to do with with culture. Brands are not people and can be trusted the same way. And they've also haven't made the investment into moving beyond selling people something to actually being involved in their lives and helping them, where KOLs have. They've figured out how to actually leverage and really be valuable on social media. And because brands haven't, now they have to work with KOLs because the ship has sailed. There's a few brands out there that are doing some really cool stuff. I think Maybelline, they're one of the most interesting brands that I've worked with, and I think they're one of the best ones out there that are leveraging influencers. They do a regular live streaming show. I don't know exactly how regular it is, but they do a regular live streaming show across all the platforms. You know, they have these big trees of cameras or multiple people operating cameras or the phones, and they invite KOLs to come and be on their Maybelline show. And so those KOLs then bring their audiences to that platform or to that show. And then that audience is able to say, hey, look, actually Maybelline is offering a lot of value here. And they're bringing in other stuff and they're doing something very different and interesting. And that's a really, really wonderful, really beautifully executed strategy and idea that you would start to actually really offer people value and not just gate content, blocking, you know, what people actually want to see with your brand message, or trying to maybe sneakily embed yourself. You know, sometimes I get a little bit critical where I'm kind of like, well, you're being a leech a little bit in this environment. Instead of actually really, really offering people value, you're still looking at it in a very traditional sense of saying, well, because I don't get the attention, I'm just going to buy it and just smash myself into this message somehow. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we'll see at times brands fail with KOL marketing, is because they still don't get it. They're still operating on a very old traditional marketing model of gating or blocking or trying to be exclusive instead of trying to be involved in people's lives.
And then there's episode 15, perhaps our biggest name that we've had on the podcast. Kaiser Kuo joined us to talk a little bit about Baidu. You know, he used to be the international communications director for the search company, and talk a little bit about why we should cut Baidu a little bit of slack. You know, they get a lot of bad press here in locally in China. In the West, the press isn't always great. but they get slammed for a lot of their advertising choices and some other things that they've been doing. But I think in this episode, Kaiser really is able to kind of lay out the fact that they are a company with admirable values, and that while they may have made some mistakes, they're still doing pretty well.
Yeah, I remember he also gave us a couple of stories of things that went on back in the day in the internet industry. And that was really interesting. I remember that part in particular.
Yeah, I mean, because, Kaiser is one of those guys. He's, an old China hand, not necessarily in terms of age, but the length of time that he was here and the amount of study that he's done in and about China. I think the breadth of his knowledge is always astounding to me. And so he's able to kind of take us back a little while to some of the early days of the Chinese internet, which is really kind of how he got started himself. So that was super interesting.
So how about we talk a little bit about your time working at Baidu? Because sure. That's where you spent, that was your longest stint, right? And it's a company that obviously everyone listening to the podcast will know about. If you could tell us like how you landed a job at Baidu, how did you start working there, and how was it what you imagined before you joined, and actually when you were working in the company?
Yeah, I think that Baidu, I mean, I certainly was among the many people who had a lot of misgivings about the company. I think a lot of it had to do with events of early 2010, and notably, Google's pullout from China. There's a kind of psychological habit of mind that we have, whereby when you have a narrative that casts one character as such an obvious protagonist in the story. I mean, in January of 2010, when Google, sort of dramatically announced that they weren't going to censor anymore, even if that meant they'd have to pull out of China. I think there were a lot of people who imagined Sergey and Larry and maybe Eric, standing arm in arm in front of a column of tanks in Tiananmen. And, so the white hat clearly went on Google's head. And so who are you going to put the black hat on, right? There was, obviously there were a lot of people who were, huge Google supporters. I was certainly among them. I thought that Google was an excellent product. I think there were a lot of people who, but I think in a sober moment when you think about it, I don't think the narrative was exactly fair. There was never any evidence that, and there just simply wasn't true that Baidu had anything at all to do with Google's decision to decamp from China. They were certainly the beneficiary of it, but there was nothing sinister going on. Baidu had suffered pretty badly in 2008 because of the Sanlu milk scandal. This belief that they had on behest of these for sort of commercial reasons had deleted any negative results that you came up with. I think that after having spent some time there, I realized that when they delete stuff like that, it's never for commercial reasons. It's because the fucking government made them do that, right? This was, the Olympic year. It was, sort of taking some of the shine off of Beijing, because of this horrible milk scandal where all these kids had died or become horribly deformed. My sense was that my being approached by Baidu had a lot to do with the Google exit. So they had actually swung around a couple of times before, just through headhunters, but this time they made a serious, more serious approach. And I decided to see what was up and go through the round of interviews. I really, had written out a pretty thorough diagnosis of what I thought was wrong with Baidu from a communication standpoint, and what I would try to implement. And I think that stood me in good stead during that round of interviews. I was really impressed with the people that I met all the way. I mean, I had known Robin before. I'd known a couple of other people at Baidu just from, interviewing them as a reporter, but being able to ask them really candid questions and have them just give really candid answers gave me a lot of confidence. It was by no means an absolutely perfect job. There, like all jobs, there were a lot of things. I mean, people would do just insanely boneheaded things that I would have to wipe up afterward. I mean, that's your job as a communications person. But for the most part, I think that company, had its moral bearings, at least at the leadership level. There were always going to be bad apples, but at the leadership level, I thought that they were noble of purpose, and their politics aligned more or less with mine. So I found that they were much more Western. I don't mean to suggest that anything non-Western isn't good, but look, I don't know if you guys feel the same way, but I'm a guileless, dumb American, who's not really capable of being cunning and deceitful. I don't thrive in any kind of a Chinese corporate environment that isn't either A, a media company where you're supposed to be just sort of a straight shooter, or B, an internet company where the culture is derived explicitly from Silicon Valley, and they kind of like you to be really candid to the point of tactlessness.
So is that how you would describe the corporate culture, Kaiser, there? It's candid and open? And
yeah, that's not just how I would describe it, it's how they describe it too. The culture was, and they sort of winnowed it down to a very nice little slogan, which was just in English, simplicity and reliability. So the 简单可依赖. So simplicity, really what it meant was that kind of candor that I was talking about. So it was a basically meritocratic company, not very hierarchical, or at least they tried very hard not to be. You, for example, were not allowed to use any honorific titles for other people. Nobody was, Li Zong or Guo Zong or Wang Zong. It was all just first names or nicknames or, whatever people called themselves. And you were encouraged to be, to stand your ground on a good idea, and to be, stubborn to the point of insubordinate. And the culture, they sort of taught it to you with a bunch of what they called analects, the writings that they gave you at the beginning that everyone was obliged to read. Really interesting, because it's just story after story drawn from the history of the company, of employees who basically defy their managers, quite high up into the chain, and prevail. Their idea turns out to be, a multi-million-dollar idea. It turns out they had the better idea. So I like that about the company, that there was this sort of, really Silicon Valley-esque ethos to it.
And then, then after Kaiser was Daniel Ahmad, researcher at Nico in the UK. So I think that if you're a longtime listener, you probably know already that I really like video games. Really like video games. It's just that now that I have real responsibilities, I don't have much time to play them anymore. And so it's always cool for me to talk with people who are looking at the gaming as an industry, and in particular esports, because you look what's happening in China, and gaming in and of itself is huge. I mean, you look at the popularity of Honor of Kings and other mobile games, but then the potential of the esports industry to really blossom in China. I mean, it's already, a multi-million-dollar industry, and it hasn't even it's not even mature yet. And so Daniel was able to lay out some of the trends and kind of give us insight into why we should keep paying attention to China's gaming industry.
You don't need to be ashamed about being a gamer.
Thank you.
It's okay. I know from hearing stories from people, a lot of the Tencent guys, the top level guys like Pony, are also like pretty heavy gamers when they have the time. So some of China's richest people are gamers. So there's no shame in it. Nico Partners does some really great analysis as well, I think, of the gaming sector in China. So really nice to have Daniel on.
the market has evolved from primarily a sort of PC market to one that's now completely dominated by mobile games when you look at it. PC is still the largest segment of games, but mobile is getting to the point now where, in 2018, mobile is going to be bigger than PC, and that's really down to, how accessible mobile gaming is, and, how big some of these mobile games are getting because of that, and sort of how they're operated as a live service over, a very long period of time. And so the market, I think, is, I want to use the word insular, where, the companies that operate within China usually dominate within China. And so there isn't a huge amount of export revenue being generated at this point, but we're getting to the point in time now where Southeast Asia is kind of picking up Chinese games. Even the West is starting to sort of see the appeal of Chinese developed games, or games that are popular in China. And so in a few years' time, we could actually see a lot more influence from Chinese developers and publishers in the West.
Are the titles in China, do they translate well abroad? Is there because we've been talking a bit recently about Honor of Kings, and it's coming outside of China. What are the challenges there? Do games translate well, or are they, what would be are there some good case studies here?
There are a few. I think a lot of the challenges that Chinese developers face is getting the actual perhaps storylines of the game into sort of a Western environment. A lot of games in China will be based on perhaps Chinese history, so maybe the Three Kingdoms period, or sort of the Journey to the West novel. And so a lot of gamers in the West just aren't familiar with those type of games and those kind of storylines. And so that's one big challenge right there. The second challenge is that games in China as a whole are, very online based. They're free to play. They are extremely social, and they almost have sort of a pay to win and competitive element built in. And in the West, there's been a bit of a stigma towards that in the past. We are seeing that change, and we are seeing that, esports is now growing a huge amount in the West. We're seeing that free to play is now a dominant model on mobile. A lot of people are warming to that sort of gameplay model. And so whilst it's taken a long time to get there in the West, I think now the market is ready for these kind of Chinese games that utilize that model. It's just a case of localizing them to appeal to Western gamers' tastes. And that's why, for example, with Honor of Kings, whilst there are characters from Chinese history in there, they've also tried to add in characters that are known in the West. So, for example, Tencent have partnered with DC Comics to bring Batman into the game. And so that's one of the ways that they're sort of saying, well, look, for the Chinese version, there's all these Chinese characters, but for the Western version, you can play as Batman, who's quite well known, and, I think everyone knows Batman.
Well, it's interesting because, Honor of Kings, they're trying out to go global and to enter other markets, but there have been other companies, Chinese companies in the past. I'm thinking in particular of Snail and Perfect World, which also made forays into international markets. So what happened with them? Were they successful at all?
There's been varying degrees of success for some of their games, and others have just outright not taken the market at all. But the key for them is that they launched a number of MMO games, MMORPGs, and that sort of genre in the West isn't as big as it is in China. Whereas MMOs are, the number one and number two genre in China. In the West, there's only a few that really sort of stand out and do well, and they're mostly sort of PC games. You don't see that genre a huge amount on mobile, which is where Perfect World and Snail games have moved in China. And so I think there's an opportunity in the West for those games, but right now there isn't that audience there for this sort of MMO title.
Okay, we're back, and now we're going to look at episode 19. God, we were doing pretty good at this stage. Back-to-back good episodes here, which was Danny Lee from Tencent's English language report analysis division, China Tech Insights, which unfortunately I don't think they're doing anything with that anymore.
No, I think they're defunct, unfortunately.
Yeah.
They were doing really well, and so it's part of Tencent's intelligence department, so like their research department, and I think they just realized that they didn't have the resources or the capacity to really support China Tech Insights all that much.
I imagine that Tencent, they just don't have enough money. It's probably I don't know. There's something there. I mean, I just don't think they feel it was that important somehow, but. Anyway, Danny and Ray did a great job and translating and supplementing the materials coming out of Penguin Intelligence. And they're sorely missed. But we did manage to catch Danny for this episode which was actually one of our most popular episodes In terms of downloads, I don't know what happened. Maybe it was the title, because the title was a bit clickbaity.
Yeah, it was a bit clickbaity. But also, I think especially back then. So this was a little bit less than a year ago. Just a little bit less than a year ago when we had Danny on. I think that at the time there really wasn't that much information about Toutiao or ByteDance in English. Their international PR strategy was almost non-existent at that time. This is before Douyin and TikTok and TopBuzz and stuff, or at least when they were first getting started with it. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do that episode was, of course, because Danny did a great job, or CTI did a great job with that report. But then also because there's really not enough there at the time. There was not enough information about Toutiao for an English speaking audience.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've been early on a couple of things, I think, and I kind of, if there is a topic that we're interested in, definitely we try and cover it early on the podcast if we can.
Exactly.
Not always possible, but I think with ByteDance, especially now, you look at it on, where we are today with ByteDance and what they've been able to achieve with Douyin and TikTok internationally. This company's going places. So it's nice that we got in there early and covered it.
I think the major reason that Toutiao has raised the attention of BATs is because he's growing too fast. The app is built like 5 years ago, but now it has if we are telling from the monthly active user, it is around 20 something in the app market. And if more strikingly is that the average time users spend on Toutiao, according to the data from QuestMobile, the average time spent by every user on Toutiao every month is like 992 minutes. And do you know how much time users spend on WeChat every month per capita? 1,192. So it means users spend the most time on WeChat and then spend the second most time on Toutiao. That is quite striking. And if we are compare Toutiao with the similar apps, including mobile news apps, including other news aggregator, it's only second after Tencent's news portal, Tencent News app. So that's basically the position of it in the Chinese app market.
Why do people spend so much time?
I guess we have to trace a little back to his history. Toutiao, in essence, it's an entertainment app. It is not a news app. And I wanna explain a bit. We usually access information and news on news portals or news apps, like including Tencent News, Sohu News, Sina News, the big 5 or big 4 news portals in China. Those news apps are basically about serious news informations, But Toutiao, I don't think it is a news product. It is more a mobile reading product. It is more about entertainment. According to Toutiao, the content on Toutiao, more than 60% is about entertainment content, which explains that why Toutiao is getting used so quickly. It's about entertainment. And then the second reason that it is people want to spend so much time on it is a pure mobile product. In around 2012, people are switching from PC to mobile in China. A lot of people are the mobile adoption is popular since 2012. Since that trend, and then they launched a mobile-only app. I think that is another reason. And then the third reason could be the keyword here is fragmentization. If we are going to playing games or watching videos or reading a long article, you have to dive deep into it. You have to spend hours into it. But we don't have that much time to spend on on entertainment after like 8 hours of work, after the so fast pacing life in China now. Anyway, it is hard to catch the user's attention for such a long time. So you have to make every means to attract users, to make them spend their time, their fragmented time on your app, like when they are commuting, when they are having dinner, when they are like on bed before they fall asleep. Those fragmented time is taken by apps like Toutiao, which provide fragmented reading articles. So that is the third reason. I think the fourth reason is that their recommendation. Their recommendation is very accurate compared with traditional news products. In traditional news products, they only supply a limited amount of content, which is selected by editors. So it is not users who decide what to read. It is the editors who decide what to read. And the amount of content is limited. However, in Toutiao, the supply of content is endless. You can scroll down again and again to get endless access to content. And also the content you are reading is recommended according to your reading history in Toutiao, which is like related to what you are interested in. So if you are reading on Toutiao, you must feel like you are addicted to this kind of thing to keep scrolling down. So I think the above four reasons are why people are spending so much time on Toutiao.
And then episode 20, Alipay versus WeChat. And so this is actually one that I remember pretty well because at first I didn't actually want to do it. Because I remember when the news about Smile to Pay came out, I kind of brushed it off as some gimmicky, Alibaba doing some gimmicky stuff, which they do. But it was actually a really good jumping off point for a much broader discussion. And I think in our list, it is one of the only ones. So I think we have 3 in our list of just you and me, Matt, having a discussion. And I think this one was, it really kind of jumps out for that reason, but then also because it was fairly wide ranging in a certain sense, but then also very specific about the power of mobile payments and kind of what both WeChat and Alipay are trying to do.
Yeah, exactly. It was a good one. I think we just covered a lot of the rivalry between Alipay and WeChat Pay, and then discussing things like cross-border payments and the international expansion of these platforms, and facial recognition payments, as we know now, have really taken off. I think they're just cropping up everywhere. Facial recognition for everything's kind of taking off in China, not just payments. So it ended up being, quite an important topic, I think.
As you say, because also with the Tencent charity drive, it was, you could donate as little as 1 renminbi and you would get this this painting. And what's actually really cool, again, I think it's that this painting, it's all virtual. And so that was actually really cool. So for 1 renminbi, I can get this virtual reprint of a painting that a young child did themselves. And so it's not like, okay, I'm going to pay a certain amount of money to get a real thing, but I'm going to pay a certain amount of money to get this virtual thing, and then I'm going to post it on my WeChat Moments, not only to show how good of a person I am. So in the parlance, it's called virtue signaling. So I can go to my Moments, I can virtue signal, and then other people are going to want to get on board as well. And so I think that this is the really cool thing about how WeChat and the payments and all this stuff kind of ties together, is that it's so easy for them to also leverage the social aspect of WeChat, both the public moments, the news feed, but then also the private chats as well. And so there's so much synergy there. It's really mind blowing if you think about it. But I think that it's also interesting to see, as you say, how they're exploring different ways of incentivization. And I think that more and more as, China goes through this quote unquote consumption upgrade, I think you're going to see this more and more, because people aren't going to be so fixated on getting the best deal or making sure that they're saving so much money. Rather, they're going to be looking for things that make them feel good. And as you say, planting trees or, supporting some type of child-focused charity. I mean, it of course, it always makes people feel good. But as you say, I mean, we talked about this earlier. We mentioned it earlier. But what's really interesting to me is that on the one hand, it is a bit fragmented in the sense that you have WeChat Pay and you have Alipay, two very separate ecosystems. I mean, as far as I can tell. So unless something huge happens, I mean, they're never actually going to work together. And so you do have these two very, very separate ecosystems, but then just how similar they are to each other. And so you look at both with the financial products, both with these charity incentives. Both, Alipay has tried to introduce a social feature that ended up, to comedic effect. If you're interested in learning more, I'll link to an article that details some of the problems. And now they're also trying to copy the mini programs from WeChat. And so, I really do. It's one of those things, like, you look at the progress that WeChat has made since they first started doing payments. You have to remember that that WeChat as a product has only been around since 2011. I mean, I say only, but that's a short time compared to how long Alipay has been around. So WeChat as a product has been around since 2011, and the WeChat Pay has been around since about 2013. And so in 4 years, they're almost equal to the user base of Alipay. And so it's super, super interesting to see how Alipay is trying to catch up. So WeChat is trying to catch up with some of the financial products, but then Alipay is trying to catch up with some of the other social features, including the mini programs.
Yeah, in terms of users, WeChat Pay always they quote 600 million now, and Alipay quote 520. 520 users. It's on their website. I checked it like last week. I was a little bit confused by that, because usually the industry standard is to say monthly active users, right? That's what people quote, not users. Users doesn't really mean anything to me. It could be registered users. It could be, I think it's deliberately quite vague. Anyway, the number they quote is 520, I believe, million users for Alipay. Essentially, Alipay, I think in their PR stuff, anyone who uses Taobao and anyone who uses Tmall to buy anything is essentially an Alipay user in terms of how they count it. And from WeChat's PR side, in my mind, anyone who's sent a Hongbao is a WeChat Pay user in terms of how they count it. So, I don't think I think their numbers are a little bit inflated. If I have no proof of that, so but it just from my observations that both of them are sort of in a PR war right now internationally to say that they have the more users. But mini programs is an initiative from WeChat that Alipay has also launched recently, and they actually got caught copying code for it, which was quite funny. And maybe we can link to an article on that for a little bit more of a deeper dive into that if you want to know. But essentially, the Alipay team got copy and code from WeChat team, which I imagine happens a lot in the Chinese internet space. These giants all have spies in each other's teams, and there's a lot of copying goes on. I don't think copying is necessarily a bad thing, so I don't really like using the term that much. Inspired, perhaps, is inspiration. They've gained inspiration is a better thing, because it really, in the internet space, it's everybody copies, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing. But here, maybe the boundaries have been overstepped in terms of, like, they literally did copy and paste code, which I don't know actually that's what the legal implications of that are, but nobody really talked about that in any of the stuff I read online regarding that, or when I spoke to people about it, nobody seemed to be bothered about the legal implications of that in China. I think it's just a sort of open industry secret that's what goes on between these companies, is that they do have moles and spies and secrets and code between them goes back and forth.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think it was just one of those surprising PR failures on the part of Alibaba. I think, as we said, their PR is great, but it's super interesting to see how people react to this stuff, because on the one hand, it makes their life so much easier, but on the other hand, they're willing to jump on them for some bad things that they may or may not have done. So yeah, that's about all the time we have for this episode. We're actually going to split up the review because again, like Matt and I think that we just have some really good content, and we want to make sure that we get a chance to cover all of it. But in order to do that, it's a bit too long, so we're cutting it into 2 episodes. The next episode will come out next week. And as always, we look forward to your feedback. I think that, when we get, iTunes reviews, when we get messages on LinkedIn or in Twitter, it's very validating. I think that sometimes, if people don't say anything to you, all you have to go on is the downloads or the page views, which, is very, impersonal. But, if we can actually get some real feedback from people, and get some, and also get some ideas from you as well, we'd really appreciate it.
Well, having said that, I think there's been I've got plenty of feedback over LinkedIn. That's been really good. So thank you for everyone who's contacted over LinkedIn. And yeah, we do get the occasional message on WeChat as well. So I think, yeah, we definitely do have listeners who've contacted us here, and that's great stuff.
Yeah, that's great.
So thank you for everyone who did that.
And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you left a review on iTunes. If you're on Pocket Cast or Overcast, you can tap on that star button, and it will recommend this episode to your network. If you want to get in touch with either Matt or I, you can find our contact information in the show notes. And in case you didn't know already, TechNode has a plethora of newsletters for your daily consumption. We do a daily briefing, which is a less than 3-minute curated summary of some of the biggest tech news stories in China that we did not cover directly. We also do the China Funding, which is a thrice weekly newsletter looking at some of the top fundings of the week. And as we go forward, of course, we're going to expand that selection. So if you want to subscribe, just go over to technode.com/newsletters.